Good morning. This is Mr. Mike from the Mechanicsburg Learning Center, and it's time for episode 44 of Mr. Mike's Dino-A-Day, brought to you by the Mechanicsburg Learning Center. Today's animal, one that doesn't get a lot of recognition, and as we've mentioned in our previous 43 episodes, can you believe this is number 44? In our previous 43 episodes, I've mentioned that the reason we do this is because we need for folks to know that there are more than 5 or 6 dinosaur species out there. So I'm talking to you adults. Kids can normally name 12, 15, 20. I've met children that can name 60. Some can name more than I can. But the animal today is very interesting because it reminds people of T-Rex, but there are some very, very interesting and pretty significant differences. The animal today we're talking about is Ceratosaurus. Let's have a look at Ceratosaurus, shall we? There's Ceratosaurus in all his glory. The things that make Ceratosaurus a little different, take a look at his arms. That's different than T-Rex, isn't it? You see these things, which are not long, but not as puny as we always make fun of the poor T-Rex for. A very wide tail, kept it pretty straight for counterbalance. Now let's zoom in and take a look at the head. By the way, when we talk about the long arms, take a look at the hands themselves. How many fingers are on there? Can you see? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 claws, 4 fingers, so he actually had twice as many as T-Rex. So now let's take a look at the head. Well, the first thing you want to notice is this thing right here. Very, they would call it a blade-like protuberance, a blade-like horn there on his snout, and just kind of like Allosaurus, he had 2 horns above his eyes. Okay, now let's take a closer look at his teeth. I'm going to put this down so you can really get close to this one. His teeth are pretty interesting. For the size skull he had, they were really very long. All right, you can see definitely carnivorous animal. Let's see if it might look better if I hold this way. The nice thing about this particular model is you can close his mouth. Ooh, there he goes. And in some species of the Ceratosaurus, his teeth were so long that they actually extended down below his bottom jaw. So those are some serious teeth. Did not have an extremely strong bite, but had a very effective bite. So this is Ceratosaurus. Second name of Ceratosaurus, just like we've said before, Tyrannosaurus. Second name Rex. Second name of, let me get this for you. Tyrannosaurus was Tyrannosaurus Rex. Second name of Ceratosaurus is Nasicornis. Now Nasicornis refers to that little thing on his snout, the that sharp thing that would hold a horn. Now we think that he was in the neighborhood of 18 to 23 feet long, and this thing on the end of his nose was about 5-6 inches, but in real life it was probably the base of something that would hold something much larger. So this would be something that we've talked before about, the keratin in your fingernails. That thing was probably covered in a hardened keratinous sheath. So the thing could have been, another, who knows, could have been 7-8 inches long. So it was discovered in 1883 by a gentleman named Marshall Parker Felch. This thing lived about 150 million years ago. 1884, only a year later, was described by one of the most preeminent and still to this day fairly famous paleontologists, Othniel Charles Marsh, O.C. Marsh for short. His name, Ceratosaurus, means horned lizard. Second name, Nasicornis, means nose horn. So his full name, Ceratosaurus nasicornis, horned lizard, nose horn. So paleontologists are pretty straightforward when they name these beasts. He was discovered in Colorado, 1883, a near complete skeleton, which is one of those unbelievably fortuitous things that take place when you get a chance to see almost all the bones fully articulated where they're supposed to go. As we've discussed, sometimes you find the horn or a sharp spike and you place it in the wrong place, which was the case with Iguanodon. So it was discovered in Colorado in this famous Morrison Formation. When you start to look at paleontology closely, the words Morrison Formation come up an awful lot because there's a distinctive sequence of Upper Jurassic sediment that took place. So it preserves animals right when they were living, and you can tell by what layer of rock they're in how old they were. So we've talked about the fact that it was 18 to 23 feet long. Talked about the fact that it has 4 fingers, not 2 like T-Rex, so it had double the number of fingers. Also, in previous episodes, we've mentioned something called osteoderms. You typically don't see osteoderms on things that look like theropod T-Rex. Osteoderms are those little tiny things that bump up from beneath the skin like a scoot on a crocodile. And the word osteoderm means bone skin. So it's a bone that's hidden under the skin that protrudes out a little bit and makes a bump. So this guy had them on his back, like the sauropod Ceratosaurus that we've mentioned in the past. So, in addition to the fact that he had the horn on the nose, he also had 2 little horns over his eyes. His teeth were long and blade-like, very sharp. Originally, when he was discovered, back in 1883, and O.C. Marsh ended up describing him in 1884. So the bones were sent to Marsh's museum, which was the Peabody Museum in New Haven, Connecticut. So this was where Marsh was holed up. That was his favorite place to be, and that's where he lived. So they eventually made their way to the National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C., where they were on display, and they probably are still on display to this day. 1910 comes around. A few years later, 1911, Charles Gilmore ends up mounting the beast. In other words, he figures out what it's supposed to look like. So when you go to the museum, that's what they call a mount. Say, look how that particular Brachiosaurus was mounted. It's mounted, and when Gilmore did it, he put it in this position, which was a little bit earth-shattering at the time. He put it in a more horizontal position. Okay, most of the time when they showed these animals, especially back then in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they showed them more like this, with their tail dragging on the ground. And so for Gilmore to do it like this, it was pretty earth-shattering and turns out scientifically accurate. And the reason he did it like this is he took a look at the thigh bones and just basically decided that it made a lot more sense for the animal to get around like this. Once again, I'll give you a look at the very impressive face of Ceratosaurus. Okay, so there you can see 1, 2 horns over the eyes, and then this, what they call, you see, there's not much girth to it. It's very thin. All right. So again, the mount by Gilmore was ahead of its time, which made it a pretty important fossil. 2004 now rolls around, and we've discussed about what the Ceratosaurus ate, based on its teeth, based on its claws, based on its physiology, and really what it looked like. They said carnivore, pretty straightforward. Doesn't look anything like a sauropod with a small head and a big belly and an animal that would swallow rocks and gastroliths to grind up plants. Now, this thing ate meat. Now, did it eat big animals? Probably not. It probably preyed on the smaller lizards or maybe even some small early mammals that it could get to. It was pretty fast because it had pretty strong legs. But in 2004, famous paleontologist Robert Backer and his colleague Gary Beer said, based on the teeth, based on the environment, and based on other animals that we found in the same strata, there were a lot of animals that we knew would hang out near water. We felt that maybe the Ceratosaurus was a piscivore, not a carnivore, not an herbivore, not an omnivore, but a piscivore. Piscivore comes from the word Pisces, which has to do with fish, if you're into that. So piscivore was a fish eater. So did it exclusively eat fish? Maybe not. But we know that it probably did snack on fish from time to time based on the look of the teeth. Very sharp, very good at grabbing and holding on to a slippery fish so it doesn't get away. And based on the fact that when we look at paleobiology as to what the environment looked like back then, there were an awful lot of fish. So some dinosaur was probably smart enough to figure out, there's a good source of food. So Ceratosaurus, we know an awful lot about it based on that nearly complete skeleton that was discovered way back in 1883. So here is today's poem, written last evening. Ink is finally dry, all about Ceratosaurus. And the angle that I'm taking on this one, boys and girls, is when you guys get back to school, which isn't going to be too far in the future, you're going to be sitting around the lunch table and you're all going to be talking about dinosaurs. The subject is inevitably going to come up. And somebody's going to say, if you could be a dinosaur, what dinosaur would you be? Well, if I were a dinosaur, I would be this. Well, what would be the number one answer when you ask a child what dinosaur do they want to be? Unless you've read an awful lot of books, such as mine. Dinorific poetry. Most of the kids are going to say, I want to be a T-Rex. Why do you want to be a T-Rex? Because I'm a meat eater. Okay. Well, let me give you an alternative to consider. The next time you have that discussion, you're all having your half a pint of milk and discussing which dinosaur you would like to be. Here's something for you. The Ceratosaurus by Mr. Mike. If you were forced to figure out which dinosaur you'd be, you'd have so many choices from throughout Earth's history. Of course, you'd likely say T-Rex, which I think's obvious. But let me throw a name at you, and then we can discuss. Consider the Ceratosaurus. This one would be cool. I bet this beast is not the one your friends address in school. I think that given ample time, you may just come to find this dinosaur, though overlooked, is one to bear in mind. He had a lot of features you should take into account, so listen closely and you'll learn them all as I recount. Let's start out with his fingers. He had 4 claws on each paw. That's twice as much as T-Rex, so let's move on to his jaw. His teeth were long, sharp, and super sharp, designed to help him catch some darting little lizard or perhaps a fish he'd snatch. His powerful back legs were there to help him move with haste and capture anything he felt would yield a healthy taste. He had osteoderms, protruding bones beneath his skin. They journeyed down his spine right from his skull where they'd begin. So far, we've found some attributes that make him interesting. But wait, you ain't heard nothing yet. So here's one final thing. Our friend Ceratosaurus had a fascinating head. He didn't opt for bulk, per se. He favored horns instead. A ridge-like horn sat proudly near the tip of his thin snout. Above each eye, another horn resided and stood out. So when you're chatting with your friends and dinos are discussed, and they're pontificating, you can leave them all nonplussed. Bring up Ceratosaurus and then calmly make your case, and you may well be startled by the looks upon their face. The Ceratosaurus, our Dino-A-Day for episode number 44. Brought to you by the Mechanicsburg Learning Center. I'm your host, Mr. Mike. We do this every single day, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, live on Facebook, and then we post all of our videos to YouTube. So please subscribe, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Have a wonderful dinorific day. And remember, next time you're talking dinosaurs, don't forget to bring up Ceratosaurus. Bye-bye.